Hello, everyone. This is the Catholic Esquire. I'd like to wish everyone, first and foremost, a very happy Easter. We are now in the Easter season. We've made it through Lent. I thank everybody for sticking with me for my series on redemption. It's important we understand what the teachings of the faith are, what they always have been, and what they always will be, because that's part of what makes us Catholic, and that's part of what makes Catholicism the truth, and the whole truth. Now, of course, everybody's talking about the death of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Francis, the man who claimed the papacy since 2013. And you're going to see a lot of things in Catholic media about this. Obviously, secular media, they're praising him for all the wonderful things he did. And of course, the reason they think he's wonderful is because he openly rejected and attempted to change the truth of the church's teachings, dating back to the time of Christ. Now, of course, I say attempted to because you can't change them, but you can claim to change them. You can try to change them. You can convince other people you've changed them, but it doesn't mean you've changed them. And that's because there's something that's working in our favor, my friends, that was established by God Himself, established by our Lord Jesus Christ, and that is tradition. It's tradition. It doesn't change. Okay? And that's what we have to understand when we're talking about the legacy of Bergoglianism. You see, there is a slight difference between Jorge Mario Bergoglio and his predecessors, Paul VI, JP2, Benedict. And I say predecessors in quotes because there's real reason to believe Francis was never Pope because Benedict never resigned. I've talked about that plenty of times on this channel before. Uh, you can look into it yourself. It's not a complicated topic. It's just something no one wants to talk about because it puts people outside of their comfort zone. One thing Catholics don't like, generally speaking, is to be put outside of their comfort zone. And I understand that. But isn't that amazing? Because that's exactly what Francis's entire so-called papacy was all about, was putting people outside their comfort zones, wanting to make a mess of things. That's what he bragged about. That's what he wanted. He wanted you to think outside the comfort zones. And quite frankly, it is important for us to do that so we understand what the truth is and what was happening. Now, the difference between Francis and his other predecessors, I would say, is the fact that while the other predecessors at least acknowledged the existence of tradition and acknowledged the importance of trying to maintain tradition, even if what they were teaching was contrary to it. For Francis, he just simply rejected it. He didn't put up a facade or an effort to try to maintain the notion of tradition. He just simply rejected it. He called it rigidity, clericalism. Uh, he just ignored it when he put out documents. Let me give you a few examples of this here. In 2013, he issued a document, apostolic exhortation, actually, called Evangelii Gaudium. Now, this was in 2013, so this is when everyone first became knowledgeable of him because no one really knew anything about Cardinal Bergoglio before 2013. But he issues this document, and in that document, in note 247, he says that the covenant with the Jewish people was never revoked. That's actually rank blatant heresy. To my knowledge, no one really said anything about it at the time in 2013. I think when people go back and look at things that he did in the past, now people are starting to see, oh, yeah, that was also wrong. That was also wrong. Oh, that was error. That was heretical. Yeah. At the time, no one said anything about it. But immediately, people should have recognized, okay, now we see someone who's willing to completely break with tradition because the tradition clearly taught that the old covenant was revoked. But we go on to other things as well. The death penalty, for example, he changed the the catechism, literally just changed it like a statute book to say it was inadmissible when even JP2 didn't say that. JP2 made the argument, well, we don't necessarily need that punishment anymore because of the current situation with our prison systems are just so wonderful and good that we don't need to do that. That's a thing of the past. Whereas Francis says it's just inadmissible. Well, that's a difference. That's contrary to the faith. That's not what the faith always taught. That's not what Aquinas taught. That's not what St. Paul taught. It's just a complete breach of tradition. Of course, Amoris Laetitia allowing uh, communion for unrepentant adulterers. That actually, of course, is against tradition. It even specifically went against JP2, who specifically said that is not permitted. Um, Again, we have very short memories on these things, don't we? But that's because the man didn't accept tradition. He doesn't believe in it. Francis is an Enlightenment based, essentially anti Catholic thinker who rejects any authority that comes from his predecessors or the councils or the church fathers. Is pure despotism. Now he tricks people into being humble, into thinking he's humble, but it's quite the opposite. And a lot of even conservative and traditional Catholics fell for that. That's part of the Peronism that he learned when he was in Argentina. You can say one thing and say the other to different people, and it really keeps leads people off course to figuring out who this guy really is. But that's all by design. He's playing at 4D chess level, while a lot of the traditional and conservative people are playing checkers. But let's go continue. Of course, we know about Traditionis Custodes, the suppression of the traditional Latin Mass, something completely impossible according to Quo Primum and all tradition and history of the church, because it is fundamentally the teaching of the faith, what occurs at the Mass. You can't just abrogate it. But that's what he attempted to do with Traditionis Custodes. Again, a complete rejection of tradition. Keep going on. Dignitatis Infinita. It says that man has infinite dignity. That's not Catholic teaching. Man does not have infinite dignity. It doesn't take into account his sin, because when you sin and you offend God, you break a relationship with God, you don't have the dignity that perhaps you would have if you were in a state of grace as you're closer to God, because only God has infinite dignity. We are mortal creatures. But if you believe in that the humanity has infinite dignity, then from that you can create all kinds of corollary ideas that go along with that, which is completely contrary to the faith. But that was the goal there. Uh, of course, fiducia supplicans, blessings of sodomite couples. A lot of people fell for that one. They're still arguing about that, using their mental gymnastics and sophistry in order to justify the unjustifiable. The Synod of Synodality completely deconstructed the entire structure of the Catholic Church. It was an attack on the papacy itself. It was an attack on the authority of the bishops. It was an attack on all hierarchy. And everyone just went along with that as if it didn't matter. He rejected the papal titles, Vicar of Christ. He rejected the ceremonial, so many of the ceremonial uh, traditions that went along with that office. One could wonder if he really thought he was Pope, but certainly I do believe one way or the other that he intended to destroy the office of which he claimed to hold. All this comes down to, my friends, a rejection of tradition. And it's tradition which is what binds every single pope, because it's their duty, their job, according to Vatican I, to hand down the tradition intact to the next generation. not destroy it. They know what they're doing. They make up this idea of development, and they try to tell you that development is what's happening here. But development cannot possibly contrary to what was before. So it violates the law of non if it violates the law of non-contradiction, you know it can't be valid development. This is basic logic. And yet people try to argue that, and people buy it because they don't know better. Because since the Second Vatican Council, our knowledge of the faith and our ability to think, since it essentially rejects Thomism, the council did, has been destroyed for millions and millions of Catholics. Their heritage has been stripped from them. Their heritage that belongs to them. The heritage that should have been passed down to them and no longer is. But with Francis, it was not just not handed down, it was rejected. And that's a problem. So, my friends, when you hear all these people saying and trying to justify the last 12, 13 years by saying, well, there was contradictions and there was ambiguities and all these things. No, it wasn't. It was downright evil, and it was a downright attack on the church. And when we play games and when we try to excuse it in order to make ourselves look more like virtuous and pious Catholics, to make ourselves look better, to not offend people, that's a product of our modern times as well. Because what we're told by these people, the people that claim to love the poor, the marginalized, is that you have to be nice to everybody, regardless of the truth, regardless of what's happening, regardless of what they did in the past, and regardless of sin. And it's become so ubiquitous that oftentimes people just accept that theory and operate without even thinking about it. And sadly, that's the case with many traditional and conservative Catholic commentators today. But what our job must be is to speak the truth, never deviate from the truth, seek the truth, because that's even what canon law says we're required to do, so that we can defend our Lord Jesus Christ and hopefully convince those who have some ability to change things within the hierarchy to do something about it, instead of steadily laying down in an effeminate, weak manner that just continues to defend and crucify our Lord who is on the cross. But it need not be that way, because he is risen. He did defeat death, and he wants all of us to share in that redemption. But in order to do so, we must stand for the truth and stand for his church. Thank you for listening, my friends. I'm sorry I've been short on the videos lately. Anytime you do these types of videos and you speak the truth, you're going to come under spiritual attack. That's essentially what's happened, suffering through some health problems, not myself, but family members. And it's made it difficult to produce videos on a normal rate like I have been in the past. So please bear with me. I will continue the series on the history of Vatican II, and hopefully produce some new articles coming up on some topics I haven't talked about in the past, but it's very important. Marriage being one of them. We really have to look into that, because that's something that's come under attack by the modernists. We have to reclaim our heritage on that. Civilization depends on it. Continue to pray for Holy Mother Church. Continue to pray that she may be restored under the authority of a real Pope who believes in Catholicism. And thank you for listening. God bless.